On September 29th, 1941, an event began that as a child was beyond my comprehension. You see, I didn't have a normal childhood. My parents are right here, and they can be blamed for all I'm about to say. We would go on vacation to Florida, and in the midst of a vacation, they would read that the Holocaust monument in Miami was about to be unveiled and dedicated. And our vacation would come to an abrupt halt, and we would be taken to see this giant statue that, as a child, was frankly scary to look at. We sat there in the boiling hot sun, and I tried my best not to stare at this hand that pierced the ground, that seemingly reached up to the heavens for help. I remember looking out into the crowd and seeing other children who also didn't have normal childhoods, who were forced to sit there that morning in the sun in Miami during winter break. And I remember as a child being taken to museums and being taken to exhibits all around the world. The pictures I couldn't understand were these pictures from the end of September 1941. You see, in the forest of Kiev, Ukraine, was a place called Babi Yar. And at this place in Babi Yar, in 2 days in the forest, the Nazis managed to murder 34,000 Jews. 34,000 Jews. And I was raised with the very simple understanding that the reason the world didn't step in and help was because nobody knew. Nobody knew what was going on in 1941. As a matter of fact, the Forward magazine, the Jewish publication here in America, didn't even cover Babi Yar as an event for another 2 years in 1943 because it was so unbelievable to the American Jewish mind that such an event could take place, that they needed to confirm the facts and figures of the event before they dare publish it, lest they besmirch the reputation of the Nazis. I still don't understand. But it's not true that nobody knew. It's not true. That was part of the false education I was given as a child. Plenty of people knew. In 1941, a lot of people knew that the Jews were on the ropes. People were invited to Germany month after month. The most famous picture of these types of meetings that now appear in publications around the world is a meeting in 1941 between Adolf Hitler and the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. The Grand Mufti, who stood as the leader of the Arab people in British mandate pre-state Israel, he understood from this meeting that Jews were simply allowed to be murdered all across the world. Maps were shown to him. Promises were made. The Nazis would, in fact, succeed. People knew. And the reason we know that people knew was because in 1941, there was another massacre that occurred to the Jewish people of which I had no knowledge about until recently. It It was an event called the Farhud in Iraq. The Farhud in Iraq was an evening in 1941 when hundreds of Jews were massacred, houses were torched, synagogues were looted. What they believed, the Iraqi leaders of their time, the Arab leaders of that region, before there were nation states there, they believed that it was open season. And there were, in fact, no repercussions for the Farhud. The Jews of Baghdad and Basra ran as fast as they could to try to relocate to pre-state Israel. And because they could more easily mix with the local population, the British mandate did little to stop them, as opposed to the Jews of Europe who tried to come on the Exodus boats and were turned around. The reason I speak to you tonight of the Farhud and of Babi Yar is because Babi Yar was hidden from us. And October 7th was Babi Yar in color transmitted into the pockets of my children for us to watch in real time. The same exact tactics. 70, 80 years later. And while we watched those videos in horror, many around the world took from the October 7th videos exactly what they took from Babi Yar all those years ago. That Jew hatred is once again permissible and it's open season. And you can see it unfolding in so many ways around the world, not simply what happens in the forest of Kiev stays in Kiev, not simply what happens in the Nova Festival stays in the Nova Festival. We live as part of a tapestry around the world. And the Jewish people has to know that when that word is spread, that it's open season, it spreads like wildfire. And people who presumably were our neighbors, whether they live in Ukraine or Iraq or here in the United States, they suddenly aren't so polite. If there is a message that I want us to leave this Yom HaShoah that's different from other Yom HaShoahs, from all the other Yom HaShoahs in my life, I want you to leave with this very simple idea. Education alone is not enough. We've built more museums as a people than is needed to tell this story. And now it pains me to say this as a family who participated in so many exhibits and so many speakers traveling around the country trying to explain this to people. We have to do a better job of teaching ourselves the consequences of living in an unchecked world. The David Lebkovsky Project, as meritorious as it is to go into the public schools, needs to be seen by Jewish students. Survivors, as important as it is to have spent hours and hours and hours educating the rest of the world about what happened, needs to now focus on educating a new generation of children who will live in a world much closer in resemblance to theirs than to the one in which I was raised. It is difficult to fathom that all of this will simmer down. I promise you, it will simmer down. It always does. The question for us, and the question for our kids, is how we behave the day after. My whole life, I was raised with images of survivors looking into the eyes of my grandparents with extraordinary appreciation for the strength of character and for the faith in the human spirit that they exhibited when they had absolutely no reason to believe anymore. Nobody asked them if they ever needed to talk about what they had seen. Nobody asked them if they ever needed help in reestablishing themselves. Nobody even asked them why it is that they would remain Jewish after what they saw. They felt a conviction to prevail, and they did it through the success of children and grandchildren. They did it through a profound belief in what we call nachas. Were they to create enough nachas, enough pride in their family, then they will have won. I want to tell you that that should be our lesson this year. This Yom HaShoah, look inside your house. Look inside your children's homes. Are you proud of the type of Jews, of the type of education, the type of beliefs, the type of views that they carry in this world? Because it was that very simple belief as a fundamental principle on which Jewish society, Jewish families, Jewish communities have always been built, that allowed them to focus, that allowed each of the survivors to focus their efforts. They didn't need to rebuild the world, they needed to rebuild their family. And if that was the lesson following Baba Yar, which was approximately 28 and a half October 7ths that occurred in 48 hours, then we can certainly learn that for ourselves this year. It's easy to walk around and say, they should know this, they should know that, they should know better what they're saying, this is false, that is false. And certainly we've brought in mavens in communication and media here to speak to us. We've brought in diplomats to speak to us. We've brought in all kinds of speakers here at VBS. Education, so much education. What matters most is that we see the images that are on display in Washington, D.C. at the Holocaust Museum. That we walk the hallways of Yad Vashem. That we listen to the stories of Baba Yar and the Farhud. Because today as we speak, Shlomo Mansour, 86-year-old Shlomo Mansour from Kibbutz Kisufim, sits in captivity in Gaza. A survivor at 4 years old of the Farhud, and the last to bear witness to that kind of uprising. He fell victim once again on October 7th. And I'm sure if you read all of the quotes by his children and grandchildren, they believed that those types of massacres were not possible today. They believed that he believed that the world had simply changed. But I would argue that what has changed about the world isn't the world. What's changed about the world is us. In 1941, there was no roadmap for the forward to even begin to fathom, to wrap their minds around the events as it was explained to them that occurred in Ukraine. But for us, we have a roadmap. The roadmap is the families who lit those candles. The roadmap is the conviction of all of those righteous souls who walked out of the camps, who were carried out of the camps, whose memory was carried out of the camps. The strength of character that it took to rebuild, to build again, to build stronger. I believe that the generation of our children is that generation. The generation that's going to build stronger, that's going to build differently, that's going to build because we tell them that there is no other choice but to keep building, because as Jews, we are builders. As shocking as October 7th was, it should not be surprising. We sat through years and years and years of Holocaust education. What was shocking to see it in color, what was shocking is to see it unfold in real time. But what will be shocking to the world will be ultimately our response. Our response will be one not of diminished character, not one of diminished faith, not one of diminished determination. The light of the Jewish people has remained strong through darker hours than this one. I wish you saw the brightness that I see. I see it because I looked into the eyes of people who saw darkness. And I saw in their eyes love and pride. Pride in who they had become once again, pride in what they had established in our families, pride in the idea that their grandchildren would be proud Jews. This Yom HaShoah, let's cry and hold each other and walk through these halls and look at everything that was taken and then wipe your tears away. And walk out of here strengthened with a sense of pride, with a sense of trust that we will build again for a brighter tomorrow. Please rise for El Maleh Rachamim.